Hello, everybody. I want to talk a little bit about aspects of my more public-facing academic research and public engagement, and some of the debates that I've been involving myself in the last few years. And I want to encapsulate that by simply reading one of my blog posts after a little bit of an introduction. So I've called this V for Viking, which is the part of my 2019 blog post title, and it relates to a certain popular, well-known comic book, a graphic novel from series from the 1980s, and then also a 2005 film. And then I will reflect on why I'm doing that and what its significance is. So first of all, some background, then we'll go into reading the blog post. So I've put a lot of effort in the last couple of years into attempting to take up opportunities to talk beyond traditional archaeological and historical audiences in the public, and trying to work with the media and dealing with inquiries, some of which go nowhere and some of which lead to television appearances, such as featured here, on a range of issues to do with the linear earthworks of early medieval Britain and the Vikings in particular. And here's me on various shows and documentaries, making the same grand hand gestures from the tops of towers, Offa's Dyke, in various locations, and also about early medieval stone sculpture. And I've been doing the same with podcasts and with radio appearances, particularly during the lockdown period, to sort of enhance my engagement with some of the ongoing debates about the origins of the English and the significance of frontiers and borderlands of the early Middle Ages for the contemporary world, and also other unexpected appearances and issues, such as the Netflix film The Dig about the 1938-1939 excavations at Sutton Hoo, which brought a whole new host of interest in one of my areas of specialism, which is early Anglo-Saxon mortuary practice. So these are some further examples of how I, as well as TV, I've been working on podcasts and the radio to talk to different audiences beyond the traditional, shall we say, about my academic research and its synergies and connections to contemporary society. And the same applies also to more specialist magazine venues, Life Science, Aeon Magazine, History Extra, and where possible, amongst before and during the various lockdowns that England and Wales have gone through, I've been participating in various public events. I think I was the first person to organise a gone digital event in the archaeology world in the UK during the first pandemic lockdown, when many events were being postponed or cancelled. We went online with a YouTube and other social media alternative to the special offer event in 2020. Just before the lockdown, there's me working with archaeologist Adam Parsons and Viking reenactors at the Heysham Viking Festival. And last year I was at a very special event at a modern columbaria in the form of a megalithic tomb at Salton Hall, speaking to an audience at an arts performance of Beowulf, the Old English poem. So to give you some examples of the range of things I've been doing to bridge gaps and to connect to different communities and audiences. And all of that builds on my established digital profile, where I've been working on a WordPress blog since 2013. Quite a lot of posts and quite a lot of hits connecting to my interests. And with the lockdown, I expanded this to include a YouTube channel on which I can showcase aspects of my publications, the debates I'm addressing, questions that connect my research to contemporary debates, as well as conversations with other creators on different channels and with students and other researchers. So I've had an interview series with one colleague here, Professor Tim Grady, has agreed to be involved in one interview, and colleagues from other parts of the UK and across the world have contributed to that series, as well as a series with students too. And in addition, during the lockdown, a month later than YouTube, I started on TikTok, which I've now got about 9,500 followers. It's done another jump in the last week since I did this screen capture, where I'm engaging again very different audiences in relation to my academic interests in early medieval archaeology and history. So that's the background of the things I've been getting up to. But I've been translating this into academic research, publishing in edited books, such as the 2019 book by Paul Hardwick and Kate Lister, Vikings and the Vikings, Essays on Television's History Channel series. I contribute to co-authored chapters about the TV show and the world of the Viking Age behind it, and what the TV show gets right, gets wrong, and how it allows us as a venue to rethink and reflect on how we educate and engage publics with the Viking world. And in a book I co-edited, I have a whole chapter about Viking funerals as shown in the TV show Vikings. So this is not disconnected from my core academic research. There's a sort of recursive relationship between these public engagements, and that is also crystallized in the 6 University of Chester archaeology student conferences, one of which was dedicated to digging into the Dark Ages, leading to a publication involving interviews, student contributions, and expert authored chapters, as well as co-edited with Pauline Clark, who's here in the audience, a student editor contributing to that project. And this was part of a broader nest of publications coming from these student events, giving opportunities for students to present and learn academic skills in communication, and also to, if they wish, to contribute to publication. So this is just the background, and another way in which this has synergized my research with public engagement is designing, co-editing, and setting up a whole with support from the University of Chester and the Offa's Dyke Association, a peer-reviewed open access journal called the Offa's Dyke Journal, but looking at, in comparative terms, linear earthworks, frontiers and borderlands across time and space, but focusing on early medieval linear earthworks. And as many of you will know, another collaboration that's come to fruition is working with archaeological illustrator John G. Swagger to produce a heritage trail in comic form, the What's Dyke Heritage Trail, a bilingual available online with an interactive map and a PDF versions, and also a physical copy that we at some point hope to get out there post lockdowns and post COVID to engage communities in the Wrexham Borough area about this, Britain's 3rd longest ancient monument, which is still poorly understood. So it's been a busy time for taking my research to various new audiences online, and increasingly I hope physically as well. That then brings me to V for Viking, because this was a blog post I wrote in 2019, and I think it still captures some of my interests and why I think the early Middle Ages matters today. But crucially, I want to say this is about challenging some of the ways in which medievalists have, I think, failed to see the potential of their subject matter for entering into much more robust and critical conversations about contemporary society and politics. And I use V for Vendetta as my way in. So let me read it, and then I'll explain what I think this tells us. So I begin, and this is from April the 16th, 2019. What is the most famous Viking funeral in Western popular culture? There are actually only a handful of contenders, from Einar's funeral in the 1958 film The Vikings to the ship cremation in the 1999 The 13th Warrior. More recently, there have been representations of Beowulf's funeral as a Viking funeral, and there are many funeral scenes in the Norse societies featured in the popular TV shows The Last Kingdom and Vikings. However, I would like to propose one that might be far more important and better known than any of these. I can see that it might have escaped film fans, but this example will be well known to graphic novel experts and readers. V for Vendetta by Alan Moore and David Lloyd, 1982 to 1989. Subsequently, the Viking funeral appears in the 2005 film of the same name, starring Natalie Portman and Hugo Weaving, but the overt Norse associations are written out for those who might not be looking or thinking carefully. In life, V is born nameless and faceless following torture and experimental experimentation at Larkhill Detention Centre. He is set on a vendetta against a post-apocalyptic Orwellian far-right government of homophobes, Islamophobes and white supremacists. He is born from fire, escaping from the inferno of Larkhill. In death, V dies in the knowledge that he will live on as a new V, taking up the mask, and as a funeral barge destroys the heart of the Norse Fire government. So the government is called Norse Fire. In book 3, chapter 9, The Vigil, V is dying and opaquely requests to Evie, also the Victoria line is blocked twixt Whitehall and St James, give me a Viking funeral. In chapter 11, called Valhalla, Evie carries V's body onto the underground train on the 10th of November 1998 at 2 a.m. She says, give me a Viking funeral, you said. It's yours, my love, it's yours. She lays him on the train as an act of love and devotion to fulfill his wishes and consign his body to a journey to an unknown destination. Surrounded by Scarlett Carson's roses and explosives, she lays him in a glass coffin, revealing that V has carefully prepared the train as simultaneously his method of attack against Norse Fire and his death ship. She reflects on how she has sent his corpse speeding on your funeral barge along dark, dry subterranean canals, down through the dark towards your destination. V's death doesn't kill his idea. His funeral is the mechanism of his victory over his enemies and the fulfillment of his vendetta. Moreover, through Evie and his mask, his dream lives on and a new world can grow again from the ashes of the Norse Fire government's destruction. So just as anyone who knows Norse mythology will see how this is an adaptation of Ragnarok. In the film version, the glass coffin is dispensed with and a garland of roses is around V's neck and the flowers surround him. The explosives are there too, but the dialogue removes the Viking allusions, presumably too confusing, obscure or problematic for an American audience. His destination is also changed, not Downing Street, but the Houses of Parliament. Yet for those aware of the popular culture appreciation of a Viking funeral as a death on a journey, a mashup of Snorri's Edda and the Anglo-Saxon poem Beowulf, then V really does die like a Germanic hero of old, like skilled sheafing set out across the waves towards an unknown destination. In both comic and film, V's death and destination, like his birth at Larkhill, is a fiery and explosive one, a cremation through obliteration from which a new world can begin. It is a funeral operating as a social, political and cosmogenic transformation, a Ragnarok in microcosm. Evie becomes a Vidar, taking up V's mantle and living on after Ragnarok upon Asgard's ruins. This is a striking example of the pervasive 20th century idea that Viking funerals were transformative journeys. Yet there is a more specific set of reasons why I post this now. That's what I said in 2019, but it applies now. This is because it is particularly important at a time when medievalists are repeatedly writing about the international far right's appropriation of the Middle Ages, specifically Viking images, material culture and monuments, in the support of white supremacist causes. They are even deployed to justify committing acts of terrorism. From Charlottesville to Christchurch, the horrific appropriation of the Viking past continues to haunt us. In this context, academics are working harder than ever to explain the complex story of the Vikings through written sources, place name evidence, visual and material culture, and also increasingly through genomic evidence. That's ancient DNA. Why supremacist fantasies about a Viking race can be shown to be laughably inaccurate. In this context, therefore, it is important to remember that popular culture has long been populated with narratives that counter and critique these extremist fantasies, equally inspired by Norse myths and Viking period themes and material cultures. Indeed, we must recall and reflect that the most famous fictional terrorist to die like a Viking was actually a vigilante who single-handedly pursued a defence of all world cultures from all times, creating a treasure hoard of artefacts and art, the Shadow Gallery that V has curated. During his 20-year vendetta against a white supremacist regime in a futuristic Britain, he deploys the past to take revenge on the present. Apposite for today, he won through computer hacking as well as through assassinations of evildoers and destroying key government buildings. So it's the fabric of digital infrastructure of fascism as well as the physical structure of authority that he's fighting against. Also, it is important to reflect that the fact that More's fascist regime was a Christian one called Norse Fire, a useful foil to the repeated assertion that heathen communities are particularly tarred with association by association with white supremacists. In other words, Alan Moore deploys Viking allusions to embody white supremacists embedded within an infrastructure of authoritarian government, the police, the law, and the church. Yet he also shows the power of such allusions to resist them. Fire to fight fire. Now, the lessons I gained from this fictional story, first comic, then major Hollywood epic, are as follows. The fascination with the ultimate barbarians of the early medieval North, the Vikings, is no new thing. And neither is its mobilisation by the far right to promote white supremacism. Moore's comics remind us that we can fight fire with fire. He plays with the fascist associations of the Norse and also deploys a Viking hero, a Vidar, to exact revenge against them. The fulfilment of a feud fit for any saga. Point 2. V for Vendetta inspires me to think that we should stop claiming the far right have stolen a real history that is benign. The real history of an archaeology of the 8th to 11th centuries CE in Northern Europe was grim and violent. This doesn't stop the Vikings being deployed in positive fictional ways, even as violent killers, heroes, anti-heroes, and villains. This is fiction and should not inspire real acts of violence. Indeed, stories like this can forward the cause of peace, peaceful protest, and shared understandings between communities of very different origins and backgrounds against violent extremists who wish to claim the Vikings to foster divisions in the modern world. 3. We must therefore end the ultimately self-defeating strategy of denouncing and fact-checking in isolation those with an enthusiasm for Viking history, mythology, archaeology, and heritage, including those that find elements of a neo-pagan faith in the Norse sagas. Let's not scoff at reenactors and cosplayers, Jorvik festival goers, Minnesota Viking fans, Marvel superhero obsessives, and Skyrim players. These are forces for potential real positive fantasy, fable, and craft, not fake histories. Equally, though, let's not fall into the trap of implying those with a passion for Viking metal or war drone, skaldic poetry and runestones must inevitably harbour white supremacist leanings. This misses the point that the Vikings are malleable, fun and fascinating, terrifying and challenging, sometimes familiar, sometimes uncanny, and they operate across popular culture, far beyond far-right loners in basements and racists at rallies. As such, they are everybody's, not the exclusive territory of a few extremists and lunatics who regard the early medieval Norse as a model for how society today should operate. V is for all of us, not a named individual. 4. Finally, let's focus our energies on how we write responsibly and engage with the Vikings, and by directly tackling Vikingisms as gateways into rich, responsible explorations of Viking past and present, their problems and complexities, their evolving and shifting relationships with other early medieval communities and medievalist imaginings. Drawing on our expert knowledge of the human past, we can deploy such investigations through popular culture as a resource to engage and explain, to challenge and critique. We can do this too if we stop thinking of the Viking past as a battleground of symbols and tropes, race and religion, which extremists have already stolen away from us. Instead, let's remind ourselves that idiots and radicals cannot fully appropriate or control such a complex and diverse intellectual and creative space in popular culture as the Vikings, with its manifold groundings in many academic disciplines and popular stories, many fantastical, some rooted firmly in the human past. Academics must hold their nerve in exploring and celebrating the Viking Age as well as challenging those that attempt to appropriate it. In doing so, we must seek out positive ways forward, not denounce and fact-check away the Vikings and thus abandon them to a far-right fantasist fate. In conclusion, before academics write again, equating the popular culture of the Vikings with the far right, let's remember the verisimilitude and valour of V and V for Vendetta. The Victoria Line Viking funeral leads to a Valhalla for V, but simultaneously it affords a victorious vengeance against vicious and venal vermin in Downing Street. Rather than abandon or denounce those that love the Vikings and thus abandon Norse history and archaeology to a violent hate of the far right, let's remember the power of Vikings as a cluster of ideas and how they can change the world, Vikings are venial, not always vice. While varied and varmint, valiant and violent, vagabonds and vagrants, the widespread global popularity of the Vikings has already a verdant vanguard of vivid visuals, verse ventures and vellum vectors, with which to venture forth and both veto and vanquish white supremacist vulgarity with veracity, vindication, and verve. Let's use our venerable verbiage and visuals as a visor to protect and promote an inclusive society from extremism. V reminds us that together we can send white supremacist ideas to their doom, not to Valhalla, but to vomit them verily on a voyage to a vacuous and vile vortex. So V is for vendetta, but V is also for Viking. Now, my point here is then to pick up on two recent comments. David Wallenberg's 2018 book, Medieval Imagery in Today's Politics, we must espouses a review of the far right appropriations of the medieval and including the Vikings, but mainly the medieval more broadly. And he urges academics to not avert our eyes, to counter vicious manipulations, and we must be vigilant. Burkitt, writing after the 6th of January 2021 Capitol, the riots, argues that we must not just write good news stories and positive and accurate representations. There's more we should do in the wake of mass shootings of these appropriations. Otherwise, we risk, we must at least, if anyone has a genuine interest in Norse mythology, and he's interested in mythology specifically, we need to be far more involved in countering these abuses on our subject on the ground. Otherwise, we risk ceding the field to those who see the vague concept of Norse heritage as a way to further unite an international fraternity of violent white supremacists. So we all agree with the problem. But what I haven't seen in most of particularly the literary scholars' work on this issue is any solutions. And I contrast these views subtly but significantly with what I wrote in the introduction to the book I co-edited with Pauline. The ongoing task of denouncing false and pseudo-archaeology remains critical at this time, yet equally important, archaeologists must work collectively to create exciting and engaging narratives that challenge existing audiences and reach out to new publics. Rather than conceding terms and territories to extremists, re-energized stories from grand narratives down to local histories can be mobilized by archaeologists to combat misrepresentations and appropriations of the early medieval past in robust and sensitive and sustainable fashions. That's the aspiration. So I'm going to be writing this up for a forthcoming book chapter, but it still is there on the blog, and it's to return to the blog that's my concluding point. If we're going to do this, we have to not only try different media, we have to try to engage not only with what happened in the past as some kind of fact-checking counter to the fantasies of the present, we must actually engage with those tropes, those stereotypes, those narratives, and actually find common ground with many enthusiastic amateurs who have positive and constructive things to say in relation to the Vikings. So from V to Evie, we can rebuild from the fragments of this mess new stories about the Viking Age moving forward. And that's what I think our task should be as early medievalists, as archaeologists for the Viking Age.